The heir to Chicago's most ruthless crime syndicate was dying, and million-dollar doctors were completely blind to the cause. 6-month-old Leo was wasting away, and his father, a man who commanded empires with a whisper, was seconds away from burning the hospital to the ground. But the person who ultimately saved the Mafia prince wasn't a world-renowned specialist. It was a fiercely observant, plus-sized night nurse named Clara, who saw the deadly truth hiding in plain sight. The VIP pediatric wing of Chicago Presbyterian Hospital was usually a place of hushed, sterile privilege. Tonight it felt like a war zone, waiting for the first shot to be fired. Lorenzo Enzo Moretti, the head of the Moretti crime family, stood by the window of room 412. He was a man carved from marble, and violence with a tailored charcoal suit that barely concealed the lethal tension coiled in his broad shoulders. Outside the solid oak door of the suite, 4 of his top enforcers, including his notoriously brutal right-hand man, Tommy Callahan, stood guard, refusing to let hospital security anywhere near the corridor. Enzo didn't care about hospital policy. He only cared about the tiny, fragile figure lying in the center of the oversized crib, his son, Leo. 6 months ago, Leo had been a healthy, screaming miracle, born into a world of shadow, but representing Enzo's only source of light. Enzo's wife, Isabella, had died of a sudden aneurysm just weeks after the birth, leaving the ruthless syndicate boss as a single father. Leo was supposed to be the untouchable heir, but over the last 3 weeks, the baby had been deteriorating at a terrifying rate. Leo was losing weight steadily. His once chubby cheeks had sunken in his skin, carried an ashen, translucent pallor, and his cries had devolved into weak, reedy whimpers that tore at Enzo's soul. "I don't pay you to guess, Doctor." Alston Enzo's voice was dangerously low, vibrating with a deadly calm as he turned away from the window. He locked his dark, bloodshot eyes onto the chief of pediatrics. Dr. Richard Alston, a man who usually commanded a room with his Ivy League credentials and arrogant swagger, was actively sweating through his lab coat. "Mr. Moretti, I assure you we are running every conceivable diagnostic panel. We've checked for cystic fibrosis, severe gastroesophageal reflux metabolic disorders, and congenital heart defects. His blood work is erratic. His white blood cell count spikes and drops. The malabsorption of nutrients is unprecedented." "Unprecedented," Enzo repeated, stepping closer. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "My son has been in this hospital for 5 days. He has lost another 14 ounces since he arrived. He looks like a ghost, and you are telling me it's unprecedented." Enzo's hand shot out, grabbing Dr. Alston by the lapels of his pristine coat, lifting the man to his toes. The heart monitor attached to little Leo beeped in a rapid, distressed rhythm, a cruel soundtrack to the violence unfolding. "If he dies," Enzo whispered, the threat laced with the promise of absolute ruin, "there isn't a hole deep enough on this earth for you to hide in." "Put him down, Mr. Moretti. You're blocking my charting station, and your cologne is giving the baby a headache." The voice didn't come from the terrified doctor, nor did it come from one of the armed guards at the door. Enzo slowly turned his head, his grip loosening just a fraction. Standing in the doorway was a woman holding a clipboard, her hands planted firmly on her wide hips. Clara Jenkins was 34 years old, beautifully unapologetic in her plus-sized figure, wearing royal blue scrubs that hugged her generous curves. She had warm, caramel-colored skin, dark eyes that missed absolutely nothing, and a stance that suggested she regularly wrestled bears for fun. Tommy Callahan stepped into the doorway behind her, his hand hovering over his jacket. "Boss, she just pushed past us." "I didn't push past you, Mr. Callahan." I politely asked you to move your massive shoulders out of a fire exit pathway. Clara interrupted, without looking back. She stepped fully into the room, her eyes locked onto Enzo. She didn't look at the gun holstered at his hip. She didn't look at the terrified chief of medicine. She looked straight at the baby. Enzo released Dr. Alston, who stumbled backward, gasping for air. Enzo's eyes narrowed at the nurse. He wasn't used to people speaking to him without a tremor in their voice, let alone a hospital employee giving him orders. "Who the hell are you?" Enzo demanded. "I'm Clara. I'm the night shift charge nurse, and as of 5 minutes ago, I am personally taking over Leo's care," she said, walking briskly past the most dangerous man in Chicago. She moved with a surprising quiet grace, her soft hands reaching into the crib. "Dr. Alston, you can leave. Your heart rate is elevating the room's anxiety, and Leo is picking up on it." Alston looked at Enzo, terrified to leave, but desperate to escape. Enzo gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. The doctor scurried out the door, clicking shut behind him. Clara ignored the mob boss hovering behind her. She gently placed her stethoscope against Leo's hollow chest. Her expression softened the hard edge of authority, melting into profound maternal tenderness. "Oh, sweet boy," she murmured. "You are just so tired, aren't you?" Enzo watched her. He was accustomed to women who were either terrifyingly ambitious or completely submissive. Clara was neither. She was an immovable object in a room full of fear. "The doctors are useless," Enzo said, his voice raspy, the anger fading into a hollow despair. "They say it's a mystery, a genetic flaw." Clara finished her heart check and pulled the stethoscope from her ears. She turned to face Enzo, really looking at him for the first time. She saw past the $1,000 suit and the lethal reputation. She saw a terrified, exhausted father who hadn't slept in a week. "Doctors look for zebras, Mr. Moretti. They look for the rarest, most complicated diseases, because that's what they're trained to publish papers about," Clara said softly, picking up Leo's tiny chart. "But as a nurse, I look for horses. I look at the dirt, the routine, the daily habits. We are going to find out what is hurting your boy. But first you are going to go to that sink, use the antibacterial soap, and scrub your hands for a full 2 minutes. Because if you want to touch him tonight, you do it on my terms." For a long, agonizing second, the silence in the room was deafening. Enzo Moretti had men killed for making eye contact for too long. Then slowly, the Mafia boss unbuttoned his suit jacket, walked over to the stainless steel sink, and turned on the hot water. By day 3 of Clara's shift rotation, a strange new dynamic had settled over room 412. The hulking mobsters stationed outside had learned to move out of the way the moment they heard the squeak of Clara's orthopedic nursing shoes. Tommy Callahan even started bringing her a black coffee from the good cafe down the street at 2 a.m., a silent offering of respect. Inside the room, the tension between Clara and Enzo had evolved into something complex, charged, and intimately unspoken. Enzo practically lived in the hospital armchair. He refused to leave the building, running his illicit empire from a burner phone in the hallway, but always returning to sit in the dim light of the monitors. And every night, Clara was there. She was a revelation to him. In Enzo's world, everything was transactional. People wanted money, power, or protection. But Clara only wanted Leo to keep down his midnight feed. She was meticulous, documenting every ounce of fluid, every slight change in the baby's skin, turgor every fluctuation in his temperature. She was also relentlessly authentic. One night, Enzo watched her softly singing a Motown classic to Leo while rocking him. The soft curves of her body provided a natural, comforting cushion for the fragile infant, something Enzo's rigid, muscular frame couldn't offer. He felt an unfamiliar tightness in his chest, a profound, aching gratitude mixed with a sudden sharp attraction that caught him entirely off guard. "You're staring, Mr. Moretti," Clara whispered without looking up, continuing to sway gently with the baby. "It's Enzo," he replied, leaning forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "And I'm staring because you're the only person in this building who isn't afraid of me. It's either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish." Clara chuckled softly, a rich, throaty sound that made Enzo's heart skip. "I've wrestled 250-pound psychiatric patients high on PCP, Enzo. A man in a nice suit with a scowl doesn't even make my top 10 list of scary things." She walked over and gently placed the sleeping baby back into the crib. "Besides, you're just a dad. A very stressed, very sleep-deprived dad." Enzo stood up, bridging the distance between them. Up close, Clara smelled like vanilla lotion and hospital-grade sanitizer. He looked down into her dark, intelligent eyes. "I am many things, Clara. Just a dad isn't one of them. In this room it is—" She countered, not backing down an inch. Her gaze dropped to his lips for a fraction of a second before meeting his eyes again. The air between them crackled heavy with the exhaustion and adrenaline of the hospital ward. Before Enzo could say anything else, the door opened, breaking the spell. Beatrice Croft, Leo's private nanny, bustled into the room flanked by another of Enzo's guards. Beatrice was a stern, thin woman in her late 50s, hired from a prestigious agency specifically to cater to high-net-worth clients. She carried a specialized thermal cooler bag. "Mr. Moretti," Beatrice said, crisply, nodding to Enzo. She completely ignored Clara. "I've brought the specially formulated milk from the estate, the organic mixture Dr. Alston approved." Clara frowned, her professional instincts instantly overriding the romantic tension from a moment before. "Wait, what organic mixture?" Beatrice gave Clara a withering look, her eyes darting judgmentally over Clara's full figure. "It is a proprietary blend of goat's milk, organic supplements, and vitamins prepared daily by the estate's private nutritionist. Dr. Alston agreed that hospital formula is inadequate for a child of Leo's pedigree." Clara's jaw tightened. "Pedigree. He's a human baby, not a show dog. And he has been on an IV for the last 3 days because his digestive tract is inflamed. Which is exactly why he needs the proper nutrients," Beatrice sniffed, moving toward the small hospital refrigerator to store the bottles. Enzo stepped between them, his authoritative aura instantly returning. "Clara Beatrice has been with us since Isabella passed. She manages his diet at home." Clara looked from Enzo to the stern nanny, and then to the cooler bag. A strange, uneasy feeling settled in the pit of her stomach. She walked over to the chart at the end of Leo's crib. She began flipping back through the pages, not just her own notes, but the daytime nurse's notes, and the notes from before she took over the case. "Beatrice," Clara asked slowly, her eyes scanning the data, "how long has Leo been on this specific formula blend?" "About 4 weeks," Beatrice replied defensively. 4 weeks. The timeline hit Clara like a physical blow. Leo had started losing weight and vomiting 3.5 weeks ago. Clara traced her finger down the input/output charts. Whenever Leo was strictly on hospital IV fluids, like he had been for the last 48 hours to correct his dehydration, his heart rate stabilized, and his white blood cell count normalized. But looking at the records from his first few days in the hospital, when Dr. Alston was still allowing the nanny to feed him the special formula during the day, his vitals crashed. It wasn't a genetic disease. It wasn't a rare malabsorption issue. He was being poisoned. Clara's heart began to hammer against her ribs. She didn't have proof. If she accused a trusted member of the Mafia boss's household without hard evidence, Enzo might not believe her. Worse, if the person poisoning the baby realized Clara was onto them, they might escalate, or Clara herself could end up in the trunk of a car. She plastered a polite, neutral smile on her face. Of course, nutrition is important. Clara said, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Just leave the bottles in the fridge, Beatrice. I'll make sure they're prepped for his 4 a.m. feed. Beatrice looked smug. See that you do. Enzo watched Clara closely. He was a predator by nature, highly attuned to shifts in behavior. He noticed the way Clara's knuckles were white as she gripped the clipboard, and the way her eyes lingered on the thermal bag with a chilling intensity. When Beatrice left the room, Enzo crossed his arms. What just happened? He asked quietly. Clara looked up at him. She knew the danger of what she was about to do, but she looked at the pale, sleeping baby in the crib, and she made her choice. She would burn the whole city down to protect him, even if it meant taking on the mob. Enzo, Clara whispered, stepping close to him so the guards outside couldn't hear. I need you to trust me, more than you trust anyone else in your life right now. I need to take one of those bottles to the basement lab, and I need you to make sure nobody comes looking for me for the next hour. Enzo's eyes darkened, the lethal intelligence behind them sharpening. What do you suspect, Clara? I suspect that the monster hurting your son isn't a disease, she said, her voice trembling just enough to reveal her fear, not for herself, but for the baby. It's a person, and they have a key to your house. The hospital basement was a labyrinth of humming fluorescent lights and the sharp smell of bleach. Clara hurried down the corridor, the small glass bottle of Beatrice's special formula clutched tightly against her scrubs. She knew the overnight lab technician, a scrappy guy named David, who owed her several favors for covering his mistakes with the nursing supervisor. Dave, Clara burst into the small toxicology lab, startling the technician, who was half asleep over a microscope. I need an off-the-books favor. Right now? David blinked, adjusting his glasses. Clara, it's 3 a.m. What's going on? I need you to run a mass spectrometry and a heavy metals panel on this, she said, placing the milk bottle on the counter. And I need you to do it without logging it into the hospital's central computer system. David looked at the bottle, then at Clara's dead serious expression. Clara, if Alston catches me running unlogged samples, I'll lose my job. If you don't run this, a baby is going to die, she said, leaning over the counter, her presence dominating the small space. Dave, please. Reluctantly, David took the bottle. Give me 45 minutes. Clara paced the hallway outside the lab. Every shadow seemed to stretch longer. Every distant clatter of a cleaning cart sounded like footsteps. She was acutely aware of whose toes she was stepping on. If the baby was being poisoned, it meant there was a traitor within the Moretti family's inner circle. Beatrice was the one delivering the milk, but who was paying Beatrice? In the Mafia, power vacuums were created through blood. A weak, grieving boss, whose heir had died naturally of a tragic illness, would be vulnerable to a coup. 40 minutes later, the lab door swung open. David was pale, a printout shaking in his hand. Clara, he stammered. Where did you get this? What is it, Dave? It's laced. It's not a lot, which is why the routine hospital tox screens missed it. It's microdosed. But there are traces of ethylene glycol and a synthesized compound resembling digoxin. It's a slow-acting cocktail designed to mimic organ failure and severe gastrointestinal distress. Over time, it destroys the kidneys and the heart. Whoever mixed this knew exactly how to dose an infant to make it look like a tragic, progressive disease. Clara felt the breath leave her lungs. Antifreeze and heart medication. A cocktail of death designed to torture a child to death, slowly, all while hiding behind the guise of a mysterious illness. Print me a copy. Destroy the original file. Clara commanded her protective instincts, transforming her into a warrior. Armed with the lab report, Clara took the service elevator back up to the VIP wing. When she stepped off the elevator onto the 4th floor, the atmosphere had shifted. There were more men in suits than before. Franco Russo Enzo's underboss was standing outside room 412. Franco was a slick, calculating man who always smiled, but never with his eyes. He was speaking in hushed, urgent tones to Beatrice the nanny. Clara froze behind the corner of the nurse's station, her heart hammering. Franco Russo. He was the one who had hired Beatrice. She remembered Enzo mentioning it casually a few nights ago. Franco found us the best agency. It wasn't just a nanny acting alone. It was an internal hit. Franco wanted Enzo's throne, and breaking Enzo by killing his son was the first step. Clara took a deep breath, smoothing down her scrubs. She couldn't let them know she knew. She had to get to Enzo. She stepped out from behind the desk and walked purposefully down the hall. "Nurse Jenkins," Franco said smoothly, stepping into her path and blocking the door to room 412. Beatrice stood behind him, clutching her purse, her eyes darting nervously. "I hear you've been causing a bit of a stir with my friend Beatrice here, questioning the family's dietary choices." Clara looked up at Franco. He was taller than her, intimidating, reeking of expensive cologne and malice. But Clara had spent her whole life being underestimated because of her size and her gentle profession. She wasn't about to back down from a man whose soul was smaller than a speck of dust. "I just prefer to run everything past Dr. Alston, Mr. Russo. Hospital policy." Clara lied smoothly, keeping her face perfectly impassive. "Now, if you'll excuse me, Leo is due for his vitals check." "I think Leo is fine for the moment," Franco said, his hand resting casually on the doorknob, preventing her from turning it. "In fact, I think the Moretti family is going to request a change of nursing staff. You seem a bit over-invested." He was testing her. He was trying to figure out if she had found something. "I don't take staffing orders from the underboss," Clara said, her voice dropping into a deadly calm register that mirrored Enzo's. "I take them from the father." "Move." Franco's smile vanished. His eyes went flat and cold. He leaned in his voice a venomous whisper. "You're out of your depth, sweetheart. Go back to the break room and eat a donut. This doesn't concern you." Before Franco could react, the heavy oak door of room 412 violently swung inward, nearly ripping the handle from Franco's grasp. Enzo stood in the doorway. The terrifying, murderous aura of the Don had fully returned, rolling off him in dark, suffocating waves. He had heard the exchange, and he had seen the piece of folded paper tightly clutched in Clara's hand. "Is there a problem out here?" "Franco," Enzo asked, his voice deathly quiet. "No problem, boss." Franco recovered quickly, holding up his hands. "Just telling the nurse here to give you some privacy. Beatrice is worried about the baby's schedule." Enzo looked past Franco, his dark eyes locking onto Clara's. He saw the fire in her eyes, the desperate, urgent warning. "Clara." Enzo said the syllables of her name heavy with command. "Come inside. It's time for the baby's feeding." Franco shifted uncomfortably. "Enzo, maybe we should," I said. Enzo turned his gaze to Franco, the look so lethally cold that even the seasoned underboss took a physical step back. "She is coming inside. Shut the door behind her." Clara slipped past Franco, her arm brushing against Enzo's as she entered the room. The moment the door clicked shut, sealing them inside the soundproof suite, Enzo turned to her. "Tell me," he ordered. Clara handed him the lab report. "It's the formula. It's laced with a synthetic cardiac toxin and ethylene glycol. It's an inside job, Enzo. Beatrice brought it, but I just saw Franco cornering her outside. He's the one orchestrating it." Enzo stared at the piece of paper. His eyes scanned the chemical compounds, the irrefutable proof that his own family, his own trusted men, had been slowly, agonizingly murdering his infant son. For 10 seconds, the room was absolutely silent, save for the rhythmic, steady beep of Leo's heart monitor. Clara watched as the man she had come to care for underwent a terrifying transformation. The exhausted father vanished. The ruthless, merciless king of the Chicago underworld awoke. Enzo folded the paper deliberately, slipping it into his suit jacket. He walked over to the crib and looked down at his sleeping son. He gently reached out his massive, scarred hand, lightly brushing the baby's cheek. "You saved him," Enzo whispered. His voice broke just for a fraction of a second before turning into hardened steel. He turned to look at Clara, his dark eyes blazing with an intense, fierce emotion that made her breath hitch. It was gratitude, yes, but it was also possession. She had protected his blood, and in the laws of his world that bound them together forever. "Stay in this room," Enzo commanded, softly pulling his firearm from his shoulder holster. "Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone but Tommy." "Enzo, what are you going to do?" Clara asked, her voice trembling, as the reality of the Mafia violence she had just unleashed finally hit her. Enzo walked to the door, checking the slide of his weapon. "I am going to have a conversation with my underboss about my son's diet." He opened the door and stepped out into the hallway, the heavy wood shutting firmly behind him. Clara immediately threw the deadbolt. She stood alone in the quiet room with the baby, her heart pounding against her ribs. Less than a minute later, the muffled, unmistakable sound of a gunshot echoed through the hospital walls. The single gunshot shattered the sterile quiet of the hospital ward, followed instantly by the chaotic symphony of screaming nurses and the heavy thud of running boots. Inside room 412, Clara flinched, her back pressed hard against the heavy oak door. She squeezed her eyes shut, her breathing shallow and ragged. In her 12 years of nursing, she had seen death in many forms: car crashes, heart failures, and tragic illnesses. But she had never been the catalyst for an execution. She turned her gaze to the crib. Miraculously, little Leo hadn't woken up. The soundproofing of the VIP suite had muffled the worst of the blast, reducing it to a heavy, distant thud. Knock. 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 Clara jumped. "Clara," a gruff voice called out from the other side. "It's Tommy Callahan. The boss says to open the door." Her hands shook as she reached for the deadbolt. She slid it back the metal, clicking loudly in the tense silence. The door swung open. Tommy stood there, his massive frame blocking the hallway. His gun was drawn, but pointed at the floor. He didn't look like a man who had just witnessed a murder. He looked like a man annoyed by a mild inconvenience. "Pack the baby's things," Tommy grunted, stepping inside and scanning the room. "We're leaving." "Leaving?" Clara gaped. "He's still on IV fluids. His electrolytes are unstable. You can't just check him out against medical advice." "There is no medical advice anymore." Enzo's voice was a low, dark rumble as he materialized behind Tommy. Enzo stepped into the room. His charcoal suit was immaculate, save for a single dark crimson splatter on his crisp white cuff. His eyes were entirely devoid of warmth, twin voids of absolute violence. Clara stared at the blood, her stomach doing a terrifying flip. "Franco," she whispered the question, catching in her throat. Franco tripped and fell, Enzo said flatly. Beatrice is currently having a very long, very uncomfortable conversation with my associates in the basement garage. And as for Dr. Richard Alston, Enzo paused, pulling a folded printout from his inner pocket. It turns out our esteemed chief of pediatrics received a $2 million wire transfer to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands exactly 4 weeks ago, the day before Leo's symptoms mysteriously began. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The doctor knew. Franco paid him to look the other way, to diagnose it as a rare genetic failure so there would be no police investigation when my son eventually died. Enzo's voice dropped to a dangerous octave. Alston is currently resigning his position and fleeing the state. If I ever see his face in Chicago again, I will mount his Ivy League degrees over his grave. Enzo crossed the room, stopping inches from Clara. The scent of gunpowder clung to him, sharp and acrid, cutting through the hospital sanitizers. He reached out his large hands, gently grasping her shoulders. The heat of his touch seared through her royal blue scrubs. You saved my blood, Clara. You saw what the most expensive doctors in the country were paid to ignore, Enzo said, his intense gaze locking onto hers. But Franco wasn't acting alone. He didn't have the connections to source that kind of synthetic toxin. Someone higher up the chain is trying to wipe out my lineage. This hospital is compromised. Chicago is compromised. So where are you taking him? She asked, her voice trembling slightly under the weight of his proximity. To my estate in Lake Forest. It's a fortress, Enzo replied. And you are coming with us? Clara shook her head, stepping back. Enzo, I can't. I have a life here. I have an apartment, a cat, a job. Your job just became keeping my son alive, Enzo interrupted, leaving no room for argument. Franco's co-conspirators will know you ran the tox screen. The lab tech David is already being relocated safely on my dime, but you are the one who exposed the plot. You are a target now, Clara. I protect what is mine, and right now, your safety is my absolute priority. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. It was the absolute, unwavering certainty in his voice that chilled her, and simultaneously sparked an unexpected, undeniable thrill deep in her chest. She looked at Leo, the tiny, pale boy who had suffered so much because of adult greed. She knew Enzo was right. If she stayed, she was dead. If she left, she was entering the belly of the underworld. Clara squared her shoulders, her chin lifting in that defiant way Enzo had quickly come to admire. If I go, I am the boss of that nursery. No quack doctors, no shady nannies. I dictate his diet, his medications, and his schedule. If you or your Mafia goons don't like it, you can shoot me. A slow, genuine smirk broke through the terrifying mask of the Don. It completely transformed his face, making him devastatingly handsome. Deal, Enzo whispered. Now unhook the IV. My armored detail is waiting at the freight elevator. The Moretti estate was less of a home and more of a heavily militarized palace hidden behind 12-foot wrought-iron gates and acres of dense Illinois forest. For the first 4 days, Clara barely slept. She set up a makeshift NICU in the sprawling nursery adjacent to Enzo's master suite. Without the daily microdoses of the lethal toxin, Leo's recovery was nothing short of miraculous. His body, no longer fighting off synthetic organ failure, rapidly absorbed the proper nutrients Clara meticulously prepared. The sunken grey pallor of his cheeks was replaced by a soft, healthy pink. He even managed a weak, gurgling laugh when Clara tickled his feet. The entire household shifted around Clara's gravity. The hardened Mafia enforcers' men who collected debts with baseball bats found themselves tiptoeing past the nursery, terrified of incurring the wrath of the plus-sized nurse who had no qualms about scolding them for being too loud. But the most profound shift was in Enzo. Every night, long after his war councils and meetings with his capos were over, Enzo would enter the nursery. He had shed his bespoke suits for simple black Henleys and sweatpants, his gun placed carefully on the high dresser, out of reach. On the fifth night, a fierce thunderstorm raged outside rain, lashing against the bulletproof windows of the estate. Clara was sitting in the plush velvet rocking chair, the glow of a small table lamp casting warm shadows across her face. Leo was fast asleep, his small chest rising and falling in perfect healthy rhythm. Enzo walked in, silently carrying 2 crystal tumblers holding a splash of amber liquid. He handed one to Clara. "Macallan, 25, he said softly, pulling up a chair opposite her. "To calm the nerves. You look exhausted." Clara took the glass, the heat of his fingers grazing hers. "I'm fine. Leo gained 4 ounces today. Real weight. He's fighting his way back." Enzo looked at his sleeping son, an emotion so raw and vulnerable crossing his face that Clara almost looked away. "I owe you everything, Clara." "You don't owe me," she replied, taking a small sip of the scotch. It burned beautifully down her throat. "I just did my job." "No," Enzo corrected, leaning forward, his dark eyes intensely focused on her. "You did what no one else had the courage to do. You challenged me. You challenged the doctors. You looked at a world that tells women like you to be quiet and blend in. And you planted your feet and roared." Clara felt a flush rising to her cheeks, a heat that had nothing to do with the expensive whiskey. She was used to being the reliable one, the funny one, the strong one. Men rarely looked at her the way Enzo was looking at her right now, like she was something rare, dangerous, and utterly captivating. "I've never blended in, Enzo. I take up space." She said, a hint of self-deprecation in her voice. "It's hard to ignore me." Enzo stood up, taking the glass from her hand and placing it on the table. He knelt in front of her rocking chair, completely invading her personal space. He reached out his thumbs, gently tracing the soft curve of her jawline. "I don't want you to take up less space," he murmured, his voice dropping to a gravelly register that sent shivers down her spine. "I want you to take up all of it. Here, with me." He leaned in the distance between them, evaporating. The kiss was slow, deeply reverent, and fueled by days of suffocating tension and shared trauma. Clara's breath hitched her hands instinctively, coming up to grip the broad, hard expanse of his shoulders. Enzo groaned softly, his hands sliding down to grip her waist, pulling her flush against him, savoring the soft, generous curves of her body. It was a moment of perfect sheltered peace, until the bedroom door slammed open. Enzo was on his feet in a microsecond, his hand flying to the gun on the dresser, leveling it at the doorway, before Clara had even fully opened her eyes. Dominic Corelli. Enzo's oldest friend and highest-ranking capo stood in the doorway chest, heaving his suit drenched from the rain outside. "Boss!" Dominic gasped, completely ignoring the intimate scene he had just interrupted. "We cracked Beatrice's burner phone." Enzo didn't lower his gun. The romantic vulnerability vanished, replaced by the icy demeanor of the Don. "And Franco wasn't working with the Costello family like we thought," Dominic said, stepping into the room, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and rage. "The wire transfers that funded the poison, they didn't come from Chicago." Clara stood up instinctively, moving to stand in front of Leo's crib. "Who sent the money?" "Dom," Enzo demanded, racking the slide of his pistol. Dominic swallowed hard. "It came from Palermo, boss. It was your cousin, Matteo." The name dropped like a live grenade into the room. Matteo Moretti. The exiled prince of the family, banished to Sicily 5 years ago for attempting a mutiny. He was supposed to be neutralized, cut off from all stateside resources. "Matteo is in Italy," Enzo growled. "Not anymore," Dominic said grimly. "We just got a ping from one of our spotters at O'Hare International. Matteo landed 3 hours ago. And boss, he brought a private military contractor team with him. They're not just trying to poison the baby anymore. They're coming for the estate tonight." A crack of thunder violently shook the house, the lights flickering ominously overhead. Clara looked at Enzo, the blood draining from her face as the reality of the Mafia war crashed violently into her sanctuary. The siege had begun. The moment Dominic delivered the news, the heavy romantic tension in the nursery evaporated instantly, replaced by the cold, calculated machinery of a Mafia war. Suddenly, the estate's power grid failed. The soft, ambient glow of the nursery lamps snapped off, plunging the room into absolute darkness for a terrifying 2 seconds before the backup generators kicked in, bathing the hallways in a sinister, pulsing red emergency light. They cut the main line. Dominic growled, pulling an assault rifle from the heavy duffel bag he had dragged into the hallway. Enzo didn't panic. He moved with a terrifying predatory efficiency. He strode to the heavy oak armoire in the corner of the nursery, throwing open the doors. Behind the baby blankets and extra crib sheets was a biometric safe. He pressed his thumb to the pad, the steel door hissing open to reveal a cache of tactical weaponry. "Tommy!" Enzo roared toward the hallway. Tommy Callahan's massive silhouette appeared in the doorway, a tactical shotgun already racked and resting against his hip. "Perimeter alarms on the south lawn just tripped, boss. We have at least a dozen bogies moving through the tree line. They have thermal optics and heavy armor. Lock down the north wing. Nobody gets up these stairs," Enzo ordered, strapping a Kevlar vest over his Henley and slamming a fresh magazine into his handgun. "If Matteo wants the throne, he has to come through me." Clara stood frozen by the crib, her hands instinctively resting over Leo's sleeping form. The baby shifted, letting out a soft sigh, blissfully unaware that a mercenary hit squad was currently marching across the manicured lawn to end his life. Enzo turned back to Clara. The lethal, untouchable Don was fully unleashed, but when he looked at her, his dark eyes softened with an agonizing vulnerability. "I have to go down there," Enzo said, his voice barely audible over the sudden, violent staccato of automatic gunfire erupting from the ground floor. The siege had begun. "Matteo knows the layout of this house. If I don't hold the main foyer, they will breach the upper levels." "Go," Clara said, her voice remarkably steady. The fear was there, a cold knot in her stomach, but her nursing instincts, the ability to compartmentalize chaos and focus on the patient, took over. "I have Leo." Enzo reached into his waistband and pulled out a compact black 9mm pistol. He held it out to her. "The safety is off. Point and pull." Clara shook her head, pushing the weapon back toward him. "Enzo, if I shoot that, I'm just as likely to hit a wall or my own foot. You need it more than I do. I have my own ways of protecting this room." Enzo hesitated, torn between his instinct to arm her and the logic of her words. He grabbed her face in both hands, kissing her hard, a desperate promise sealed in blood and gunpowder. "Lock the heavy door. Do not open it for anyone but me. If you hear someone who isn't me, hide." He tore himself away, disappearing into the blood-red hallway with Tommy and Dominic. The heavy nursery door slammed shut, and Clara immediately threw the 3 deadbolts, plunging the room into an isolated, terrifying silence, broken only by the muffled rhythmic thud of the storm outside and the distant crackle of gunfire below. Clara didn't hide. Hiding meant cowering, and cowering meant leaving Leo exposed. She moved quickly, utilizing the same calm, methodical speed she used during Code Blues in the ER. She dragged the heavy velvet armchair directly in front of the door, wedging it under the handle. Then she turned to the makeshift medical station she had built for Leo. She needed a weapon. Something heavy. Something she could handle. Her eyes landed on the portable steel D-cylinder of medical oxygen she used for Leo's nebulizer treatments. It weighed nearly 15 pounds, made of thick, unyielding metal. She disconnected the tubing gripping the cold steel valve by the neck. It was heavy, but her sturdy, powerful frame was built for lifting and bracing. She gripped it like a club, stepping into the shadows beside the crib, her breathing slow and measured. 10 agonizing minutes passed. The gunfire downstairs escalated into a deafening roar echoing through the ventilation shafts. Clara prayed to whatever God was listening that Enzo was still breathing. Then the handle of the nursery door rattled. Clara's grip on the oxygen tank tightened. Rattle. Thump. Someone was throwing their weight against the thick oak. "Clara!" a voice shouted from the other side. It sounded frantic, breathless. "It's Paulie from the gate detail. Boss sent me to get you and the baby out. They breached the foyer." Clara froze. Paulie. He was a young guard, barely 22. She had brought him a cup of coffee just yesterday. She took a step toward the door, her hand reaching toward the deadbolt. Wait. Her nursing brain, trained to notice the smallest inconsistencies in a patient's story, flagged a massive, glaring error. Enzo had explicitly said, "Do not open it for anyone but me." Enzo was a man of absolute control. If they were evacuating, he would come himself, or he would send Tommy. He would never send a junior gate guard into the most heavily fortified room in the house during a firefight. "Paulie," Clara called out, keeping her distance from the door. "What's the code word?" Silence fell over the hallway. The frantic knocking stopped. "Open the damn door, nurse!" The voice completely changed, dropping its panicked facade and adopting a cold, deadened sneer. "Or I'll shoot the hinges off." It wasn't Paulie. It was one of Matteo's mercenaries. Before Clara could react, a deafening blast shattered the wood around the door handle. Splinters flew across the room as the mercenary blew out the deadbolts with a shotgun. The heavy oak door swung inward, scraping against the velvet armchair Clara had wedged there, pushing it aside with sheer brute force. A man stepped into the nursery. He was dressed in black tactical gear, his face obscured by a neoprene mask, his assault rifle raised and sweeping the room. Clara didn't scream. She didn't beg. As the mercenary stepped past the doorframe, his eyes scanning the empty space in front of the crib, Clara lunged from the shadows. She didn't aim for his armored chest. She aimed for the weakest point. With a fierce, guttural yell, Clara swung the heavy steel oxygen tank with every ounce of strength her powerful body possessed. The metal cylinder collided with the side of the mercenary's knee with a sickening crack. The man let out a roar of agony, his leg buckling instantly. As he dropped to one knee, his rifle pointing toward the floor, Clara didn't hesitate. She brought the tank down a second time, striking him squarely across the side of his tactical helmet. The heavy blow sent the mercenary crashing to the floor, his weapon clattering across the hardwood. He groaned, trying to push himself up, reaching for the combat knife at his waist. Clara dropped the tank and threw her entire body weight onto his back, pinning his arm beneath him. She was not a small woman, and she used every pound of her leverage to press him into the floor, grabbing the discarded IV pole and shoving the heavy metal base against his throat, choking off his air supply. "Don't you move!" Clara screamed, her eyes wild, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Don't you dare touch my baby!" Suddenly, a second figure burst through the shattered doorway. Clara braced herself to fight again, but a familiar, gravelly voice echoed through the room. "Clara, stop, it's me." Enzo stood in the doorway. He was a terrifying sight. His Henley was torn, his face was smeared with soot and blood, and his eyes were wild with a feral, primal panic. He had fought his way up the stairs, leaving a trail of bodies in his wake, expecting to find the nursery painted in blood. Instead, he found the woman he was falling in love with, pinning a highly trained 200-pound mercenary to the floor with an IV pole. Enzo stared at her, his chest heaving, his gun slowly lowering as his brain struggled to process the scene. "Is he?" Enzo breathed out. "He's out cold," Clara panted, slowly easing her weight off the mercenary and stepping back, her knees finally beginning to tremble as the adrenaline crashed. "He tried to trick me. He said he was poorly." Enzo stepped fully into the room, kicking the mercenary's rifle away before checking the man's pulse. He was unconscious, his leg shattered. Enzo looked from the man on the floor to the heavy dented oxygen tank, and finally to Clara. The fierce protective fire in her eyes was magnificent. She was magnificent. Enzo crossed the room in 2 strides, wrapping his arms around her and pulling her tightly against his chest. He buried his face in her neck, inhaling the scent of vanilla and sweat, letting out a long, ragged exhale that sounded like a prayer. "Matteo," Clara whispered against his chest, her hands gripping his blood-stained shirt. "Dead." Enzo confirmed his voice, a low rumble against her collarbone. Tommy put a slug in his chest in the foyer. The rest of his men surrendered or ran. "It's over, Clara. It's over." Behind them, baby Leo finally woke up, letting out a healthy, demanding wail for his 3 a.m. bottle. Enzo and Clara pulled back, looking at each other, a breathless laugh escaping Clara's lips. "Right on schedule," she whispered. The cleanup took 3 days. The bodies were removed, the shattered wood was replaced, and the blood was scrubbed from the Italian marble floors. The official police report, generously funded by the Moretti Syndicate, stated that a rival gang had attempted a home invasion and had been swiftly repelled by private security. On the 4th morning, the storm had finally passed, giving way to a crisp, bright Chicago sunrise. Clara stood on the master bedroom balcony, wrapped in one of Enzo's heavy cashmere robes, watching the landscaping crew repair the torn-up lawn. A cool breeze ruffled her dark hair. She heard the soft footsteps behind her, before she felt Enzo's arms slip around her waist. He rested his chin on her shoulder, pulling her back against his solid chest. "Dr. Aris from Chicago General just left," Enzo murmured softly, kissing the side of her neck. He drew Leo's blood. The toxins are completely flushed from his system. His kidney function is 100% normal. He's perfectly healthy. Clara closed her eyes, a profound sense of relief washing over her. Thank God. Enzo turned her around to face him. The dark circles under his eyes had faded, replaced by a clarity and purpose she hadn't seen in him before. But there was also a heavy, solemn weight in his gaze. "Clara," Enzo began, his voice rough. "I have offshore accounts. Clean money. Untraceable. I can set you up anywhere in the world. Paris, London, a beach in Costa Rica. You'll never have to work another night shift, and you'll never have to look over your shoulder." Clara frowned, her heart sinking slightly. "Are you firing me?" "I am giving you an out," Enzo said, his hands gripping her waist. "You saw what my world is 3 nights ago. It is blood and violence and shadows. You are a healer. You bring light. You don't belong in the dark with me. If you stay, there is no going back. You will be a target for the rest of your life simply because you are mine." Clara looked into the eyes of the most dangerous man in the city. She saw his fear not for himself, but for her. He was offering to let her go, because he loved her enough to want her safe. But Clara had never been a woman who ran from a fight, and she had never backed down from what she wanted. She reached up her soft hands, framing his rugged, scarred face. Enzo Moretti, she said, her voice steady and fiercely determined. I took down a trained mercenary with an oxygen tank. I exposed $1 million pediatric conspiracy. Do you honestly think I'm afraid of your world? Enzo's breath hitched, his eyes searching hers. I don't need a beach in Costa Rica, Clara continued, stepping closer, closing the final inch between them. My home is right here, with you, with Leo. And if anyone in the syndicate has a problem taking orders from a plus-sized nurse, they can answer to my D-cylinder. A slow, beautiful smile spread across Enzo's face. The darkness that had haunted him since his wife's death completely fractured, shattered by the brilliant, unstoppable force that was Clara Jenkins. He leaned down, capturing her lips in a kiss that tasted of absolute devotion, power, and a promise of forever. Yes, boss, he whispered against her mouth. 6 months later, the charity gala for the new pediatric wing of Chicago General Hospital was the event of the season. The city's elite mingled under crystal chandeliers, sipping champagne and writing massive checks, but the room parted like the Red Sea when the Moretti family arrived. Enzo looked devastating in a custom black tuxedo, his arm wrapped securely around the waist of the woman who now commanded his empire alongside him. Clara wore a stunning, deep emerald gown that hugged her curves flawlessly. She moved with the grace of a queen and the unyielding presence of a warrior. In her arms, dressed in a tiny, perfectly tailored tuxedo, was Leo. He was no longer the fragile, wasting infant. He was a chunky, rosy-cheeked 1-year-old with a devastating smile, happily pulling on his mother's diamond necklace. Tommy Callahan trailed a few steps behind, carrying a designer diaper bag that he fiercely guarded with his life. As they walked past the flashing cameras of the society pages, a nervous hospital administrator rushed up to them. Mr. Moretti, Mrs. Moretti, the board is so grateful for your foundation's $10 million donation. We've decided to name the new intensive care unit after you. Clara smiled warmly, adjusting Leo on her hip. We appreciate that, but my husband and I have a condition for the funding. The hospital will implement a mandatory secondary screening process for all pediatric blood work. No exceptions, no VIP shortcuts, and the nurses' union gets a 20% pay increase. The administrator blanched. 20%, that's unprecedented. Enzo stepped forward, his dark eyes flashing with that familiar, lethal charm. My wife gave you an order. I suggest you follow it. As the administrator scrambled away to rewrite the budget, Enzo looked down at Clara, the fierce, brilliant woman who had walked into a hospital room to save a baby and ended up saving the soul of a Mafia king. You're going to bankrupt the hospital, Mrs. Moretti, Enzo teased softly. Clara laughed, a rich, vibrant sound that filled the room as she kissed the chubby cheek of her son. I'm just doing my job, Enzo, looking out for the little guys. And in the heart of the Chicago underworld, a new reign had begun, one ruled not just by fear, but by the fierce, protective love of a nurse who refused to be ignored. What a wild, heart-pounding journey. Clara proved that true strength doesn't come from a tailored suit or a gun, but from intuition, fierce, maternal protection, and the courage to stand up to the darkest of shadows. She didn't just save a baby. She tamed a Mafia king and claimed her rightful place as the queen of the syndicate. If this intense mix of medical mystery, Mafia drama, and passionate romance kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button. Share this story with your friends who love a strong, unapologetic heroine, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more thrilling, real-life inspired audio dramas. See you in the next video.